money, hard work, privilege, inheritance, entitlement, motivation, success. All of these words can bring up a host of thoughts and feelings. Some of them tend to have positive connotations, yet many of them are supercharged with negativity. Shows such as Succession have brought attention to the realm of the uber wealthy and the dramatic flavor of issues such as family feuds, excess, sibling rivalry, manipulation, and mental health issues, including addiction. But, as many of Shakespeare's works describe, family dynamics can get particularly mucky when wealth and privilege are part of the picture. Today's expert will help us unravel some of the threads of these important issues. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real-life question. I hate to say this, but I'm fed up with my children's entitled attitudes. Both of them are partying their way through college. As background, my husband and I are hardworking and very successful financially. Although we tried to raise our children properly, they are self-absorbed and don't seem to have any drive to fulfill their own potential. They are impossible to talk to. Maybe it's our fault and we catered to them too much. But what can we do now to fix this? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manly, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manly, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are imperfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Please note, as this episode may contain sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please see the special links in the show notes. Today, I'm joined by an amazing guest, Jessica McGawley, who will be sharing her expertise as a psychological consultant. Jessica is the founder and director of DNGTON Associates, a family consultancy. Jessica is focused on mentoring the rising generation. Welcome to the podcast, Jessica. It's a pleasure and a privilege to have you with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
So before we launch into the meat of today's podcast, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you, you?
I think first and foremost, the thing that makes me me is that I am, in many respects, an activist. I'm an activist in the way I learn. For anybody who's done one of those learning assessments, I always fall into that category. I'm an activist just in terms of taking action. I know that you believe strongly in applying theory in real life and that therapy is made real by putting it in practice. I'm a big believer in that. But I'm also an activist in advocacy for those who don't necessarily feel that they have it for themselves. And I think when people hear that, they assume it's for certain groups in the world and for certain charities and organizations. And actually, the group that we're about to spend a lot of this episode talking about also require that.
Thank you for that background. Absolutely wonderful. So, when we look at you as an activist and the changes you are making in today's rising generation, because it's so important, many people write off millennials and especially Gen Z as the entitled generation. They don't want to work hard. They don't want to work the way they did or their parents did. And then it creates this tenseness in the family system and in society as a whole. So I really appreciate that you're with us today and matching you with this question, which would take a very special expert to help me dive into those dynamics. And these dynamics aren't new. For as long as wealth has been around, as long as people began to accumulate more than a neighbor, there has been an edge about privilege. And some people raise children with animosity toward privilege, even within their own family system. And so I think it's important to look, even neuro-linguistically, at words like privilege and what they bring up for us. Because privilege doesn't necessarily mean wealth.
Absolutely. Sorry to jump in there. I just feel very, this is the activist in me. I feel so strongly about it. I also feel really strongly that anyone on the planet can be and feel wealthy if they are willing to define and do the work on what wealth means to them. Long gone are the days that wealth means financial wealth. Wealth can be, if we think of wealth as being, whole and abundant, then that can mean lots of different things to different people. Therefore, anybody should have the access to feel that they can be wealthy.
I am with you 100% that wealth is truly how we define it. And I know some people who are extremely, extremely wealthy, and they are some of the unhappiest people. I wouldn't want their kind of wealth because if it came with that type of depression and angst and manipulative tendencies, all of that. And so you're right, we can have financial success and feel strong and good and whole. And we can also have loads of financial success and have an absence of internal wealth, which in my realm, that's what matters most, is the internal wealth.
Absolutely. And I think we have to, all of these big characters in films and shows like Succession and Billions and all of that, that main character is that they are financially very, very well off, but they have those emotional issues that really rule them, actually. And I think we have to have a lot of empathy and understanding for certainly first generation wealth creators, because typically first generation highly, highly successful wealth creators have not come from much financially. They have typically come from a working class background where there might have been one parent. They went to a state school, not a private school. They would most likely never have gone to university, maybe not until much later in life. They would have had, labor, hands-on jobs from a young age and worked incredibly hard. But then when they've made their wealth, they bring up their children in a very different, I'm going to use the word culture because it is a different culture. And there's this disparity between the version that they grew up in and the one they're bringing up their children in. And they've been on this race for so long, at no point have they paused to look at why they were so desperate to get out of that initial culture.
Thank you for that background. And I'm thinking of my own parents and anyone who grew up in the Depression era, anyone who grew up really working hard just to create a different life for themselves and their kids. And this happens in today's world. It's not just the Depression. Immigrants, many people face this. And when we are in survival mode, which is often what's happening when we are trying to get an education, get our first home, get a business up and running, making it successful, whatever it might be. And I'm not getting into any shame or blame of anyone because I find no use in shame or blame. I find a great deal of use in understanding what went well in somebody's parenting or life journey, what didn't go well in their parenting or life journey, and what can we do to amplify what was done well, if there's anything there, and there's usually something, and what we can do to let go of and not repeat that which was harmful or not done well.
Oh, exactly. I love that you say that. It's so true. There's so much focus on the negative, but we should all do that, actually. And that's a practice I'm going to take from this for sure. to always do that. No, you're right. If you asked any highly successful parent that I've worked with, if I asked them, would you be where you are today without your struggles? Absolutely not. They would count all of those mistakes, failures, hard knocks, challenges, maybe even disadvantages is probably a better way of putting it, actually, as being some of the key drivers that have made them so successful. And so to be able to look back at that with some gratitude as well, I guess, and not just as pain and challenge.
Absolutely. And I think that that is one of the most, I don't know about you, but I know I'm not perfect. And I've never met anybody who's perfect. And so when we focus as adults or as parents or as children on we should have done it perfectly. I should have been a perfect parent or my child should be perfect. The truth is, I have never found anyone who's perfect. And I love looking at it again just to amplify it rather than haggling over it or getting angry over it. Just slow it down and look at what we can shift in the here and now mindfully, one baby step at a time, so that we can create that future that is maybe a lot healthier or maybe just a little bit healthier than it was yesterday or 5 years ago or our parents' generation, whatever that was. So when we look at the listener's question, this very complicated question about these college age children, a boy and a girl who are, sounds like they're a bit aimless. They are still in school, so they haven't been kicked out, it seems. But the mother is the one who reaches out and is looking for what can be done differently. It is interesting that she threw in this acknowledgement that maybe she contributed or they contributed to where the children are today, that sense of entitlement or privilege. So help us unravel this because I think it will, whether somebody has $100 in the bank or, a billion times that, these are questions that can apply to all of us as
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing I want to say is they're college students, college age. So forget any success, wealth aside, they're college age. This sounds fairly normal. And I wouldn't worry too much because you still have some years for them. They're still in those boundary testing. They're still working on their identity. And I wouldn't worry about that too much. The only issue is that feeling of that big word, the entitlement word. Now, for your listener who put that question in, first of all, I want to normalize your position because I can't tell you how many parents I meet. And that's one of the first things they say to me is we have this issue of entitlement with one or more of our children. And it's a really tricky one because if you, and I don't know their generation of wealth, but certainly if they're first gen and they've worked very hard to create that different life, the chances are they have gifted or provided a more comfortable and more resourceful life for their children that they had. Therefore, they are, understandably to them, expecting some gratitude for that. The reality is their children don't know that this isn't their normal. They don't know that this is better or special than what their parents grew up with. To their children, this is their reality. So it's not extra. And therefore, there is that sort of typical entitlement. And we can add some perspective on here. At every level across the board, this will take place. But I understand as a parent, if you're putting your child through college and those are big fees, all of the costs that go associated with it, when they come home for the holidays, all you want is a little gratitude. Now, the tough thing to hear is that typically children don't entitle themselves. And I say that with empathy because I'm a mum. I get this wrong. I absolutely entitle my children now and again and, spoil them and gift them with things that really they don't need. But that is on me. So I think having that real conversation with your kids all the way along about where the money is coming from, not to guilt trip them, not to make them feel bad for it, but just so that they see these things aren't coming out of nowhere. We make sure, and we've got small children, make sure that they understand, the value of money by having a savings, spending, and gifting, box. They have multiple ways of looking at how they can look after their money. And it's not just for them, it's also for others. We make sure that they don't skip over the adverts of those really distressing charity adverts at Christmas. And like the rest of us do, we make sure that they look at that and they do see that. And I think having that connection to others is a big part of this entitlement way of solving that.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. So, when you have the savings box, the spending box, and the gifting box,
Yeah.
is the gifting box exclusively for getting other people gifts or donating?
So ours is, it doesn't, for us, gifting is for others, for charity. So it's not for your friend's birthday party, because that's our decision. But our decision is that we buy our children's friends birthday
Of
presents.
course. Okay. I just want to say how beautiful that is that you have a box specifically for donations. And I think that for me, that is one of the privileges of working hard to get some money, right? Because then we can all, when we have, whether it's $1 to spare or far more than that to spare, making it a practice to give. And it doesn't, I know when my husband and we have something in the US, I think you might have it there, the Salvation Army, and you ring the bell, and we volunteer most years to ring the bell. And when there's a parent who comes and gives their child a little bit of money to put in the bucket, we make such a big deal about it to reinforce how important that is. Not only that the parent is having their child do that, whether it's a nickel or a dollar, it doesn't matter. It's the fact that that parent is teaching the child. Let's give,
Absolutely.
let's share some of this that we've worked hard to get. And so I think I love that piece. It's so important. So thank you for answering that question. Now, another question I have for you is, when you're talking about the parents, I really appreciate that you emphasize this, that the parents may have been working really, really hard, especially first generation. It can be second generation if the parents, weren't giving a lot and they had to make their own money. So it's in that generation, whichever generation it is, where the parent was working, 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 and the child's getting, getting, getting. And it's happening a lot in today's world and in many generations before, where I love how you illuminated that the child doesn't know any different. The child doesn't know that that parent may have grown up with very little, if any, spending money, that they may be feeling in a constant state of stress and survival mode to make the house payment. It may look very abundant, and there might be money in mom and dad's wallets, but they may not realize that that parent is in a sort of survival mode. Even if a lot of money is now accruing, that survival mode doesn't always turn off, even when there's loads of money in the bank.
Oh, I've got some of the wealthiest families I've ever worked with are the most stressed about money I've ever known. I truly. And even when you try and rationalize it with them, they go, I know, but I've never been so stressed. I wish we were back in our studio eating cup of soup, Yeah, you're absolutely right.
It's a form, and people often don't talk about it. It is a form of PTSD, sometimes complex PTSD, where that person's nervous system is
Yeah,
hardwired to fear poverty because of
absolutely.
the stresses that they knew. And so that is the part where maybe having that studio apartment and the cup of soup was actually quite a bit simpler than managing all of the financial assets, and then fearing that they're going to be taken from you is likely, as often what's underneath that. So I appreciate your amplification of that piece. I just, the one last piece, the gratitude. I
Mm,
love that you brought up that simple truth, which is
mm,
many times parents are simply wanting a child to say, thank you, or I see how hard you work, or I appreciate you sending me to this top notch school, or to, this low notch, low level school because it's all you can afford, whatever it is. But it's the appreciation in all of our relationships, but particularly our intimate ones. And I often say to people when they're struggling with gratitude, which is such a basic to me, why is it easy for you to thank a server who brings you a cup of coffee, right? But why is it so difficult for you to thank your parent, to thank your child, to thank your partner? Why? What's happening inside?
Well, I'm sure you're much better at answering that about what's happening inside. But I think the point you make about the server is that it is habitually ingrained in us that that is what you do. And we don't do it at home in the same way. It is not common practice. And so even just trying to instill that, so I do it daily. When I put my children to bed, we do the top 3 things that we're grateful for, and we all have to do it. And it'll often be the same thing, but I'll occasionally get a mention in there. And, and I really appreciate that, but I'm making it part of our daily activity.
Absolutely. And listeners, I can't, and I really appreciate that Jessica is echoing a practice that's near and dear to me. I wake up in the morning and I begin with my gratitudes. I think everything from nature to, all of the blessings that are around me. Why? And I also bless, the people in my life who are important parts of my life. And I think that instills in us not only gratitude and appreciation, but that internal sense of wealth. Going back to that most important, I don't care nearly as much about what's in a bank account as I do about what's inside, what my spirit, right, my psyche. Because I will often say to people who are struggling, like they'll say, well, I can't afford therapy, or I don't want to do therapy. And I say, which would you rather have if I gave you only one choice, physical health or mental health? Which would you choose? And people will stop and say, I don't know. Do I have to choose one? I said, well, in this scenario, yes, you must choose one. And I know for me, if I had, the most amazing physical body, but didn't have mental health, it's not going to do me any good. But if I have good mental health and my body begins failing for some reason, well, then my mental health will see me through.
Completely agree. And the practice of gratitude for those of your listeners, I'm sure there are many because they're following you. But if you practice daily gratitude, you feel so wealthy. You feel so abundant. You feel like you have so much because you're reminding yourself of how much you do have. And you just go into the world and everything does seem just a little bit more bright.
It does. And so taking it back to the question of the day, with this parent, and I appreciate that you highlighted with no blame or shame. You're just very clear. Parents, likely you've done some things consciously or unconsciously, largely unconsciously, that contributed to your child feeling entitled. What might, we're talking about college age kids here, and they're toward that end part. As you notice, there's still room to make a difference. We can make difference, in our lives at any age, but they're a bit more on the outside of it. What shifts could these parents do, as well as any other parent who's listening, who has, and this might be something you answer in several questions, but also people who have kiddos, as you're the age of your kiddos, or maybe one's in middle school? What would you say to that fairly complex question I just put out there?
Well, first of all, to the actual question that the listener posted in, I would say absolutely to your point, which is they're not, yes, they're college age, but we've still got time here. And more importantly, when they graduate, which may be coming up soon, you actually want to get on with this soon, because otherwise they will return home after graduation expecting potentially more from you at a time when really they need to be launching out into life if possible. And therefore, I would say you've got to just set your expectations. You can't expect them to do it with a smile. Understand the age group you're dealing with. I mean, I'm not sure about the US, but certainly in the UK, the age from adolescence was around 19, 20. Now up to 25 is that we still consider adolescence to be taking place. So the likelihood is that your college students are still in that. And we can't expect them to not take this without, a bit of a hump. That's okay. But it's about, and I love this saying, this is a Jo Frost, who's actually a famous super nanny in the UK. But she has this phrase, which is, say what you mean what you say, don't be mean. And I think it applies to every age. I think it's a brilliant saying. So say what you mean. In this case, at this age, it's, darlings, you're saying it light, you're saying it calmly. Just so you know, this is going to be your budget. You're not going to go over it. If you go over it, there will be no extra. There will be no surplus. You'll have to find a job. You'll have to find another way to pay for your lifestyle. I'm not saying that because I don't love you and don't like you. Nothing of the sort. I'm just letting you know that I'm doing this because it will help you become more resilient and more independent in the future. Any questions?
Packaged beautifully. Thank you.
Expect a ton of kickback for that. But I do the exact same to my son. If he's acting up, if he's pushing the boundaries, if he's testing me, I will say, look, my darling, you do that again, I am going to remove your toy or you're not going to have any stories tonight. And then he does it, of course, inevitably. So I say, just so you know, the consequence is now happening. I still love you. I still like you. It's just, this is what's going to happen. And then I see it through. My husband stands by me. Tomorrow he knows.
You said a few very critical pieces that I want to amplify and highlight. Thank you, Jessica. First is notice how Jessica, listeners, said her husband stands by her. A united front in a partnership. If you're a sole, single parent, it is a bit harder because you have to be everything in being strong. If you're partnered, get aligned with your partner behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. Talk, come to conclusions about how you're going to do this so that you two can stand strong. United caregivers are such an important part of a child's upbringing at every age. So I really appreciate that you focused on that. The other thing that I appreciate is that in your nanny's saying, the super nanny, say what you mean what you say, and don't be mean, that is all about consistency and kindness.
Yep.
And so you're laying out the ground rules, you're doing it kindly, and you're staying strong. The third thing, which you're implying, and it's, well, you did more than implied it. You showed it. You had the natural consequence. Mm-hmm. Child didn't listen. There was a natural consequence. And that's where it gets so hard for many parents, many adults in all relationships, because especially if we grew up as peacemakers, if we're afraid of conflict, we can really get into, okay, I give in. I know I said it, and I meant what I said, but I can't stand true to it because my child or my partner or somebody will be angry at me or there will be too much fuss. And I think that is the critical piece of the process, is being able to stand firm when there is a tantrum by a child or an adolescent or an adult, so that you're able to stand firm through, listeners, this is called the extinction burst. If you've been giving in to a child or an adult over and over and over again, they expect you not to follow through. You might mean what you say and say what you mean, but if there aren't natural consequences, they're used to steamrolling you. So as you set boundaries and you really give that natural consequence of, I'm going to leave this conversation, or I am taking away the toy, or I'm not adding to your allowance, or there is no allowance, whatever it might be, that individual is used to ramping up, might be screaming, might be yelling, might be raging, whatever it is. And your work is to stand strong. Never allow yourself to be abused, but stand strong and not give in. And over time, that might get a little worse for a while. It's why it's called an extinction burst, because it goes up, up, up. The behavior can go up, up, up. But eventually, when they learn that you mean what you said, that you really mean it and will follow through, the behavior tends to not return again and again. It might in small bursts, but just keep standing in your truth, and it will eventually create this lovely new behavior and level of interaction that feels better to everyone. What do you think, Jessica?
Absolutely. I hadn't heard that phrasing before. I love that. But you're absolutely right. And really, for any parent listening, when you're going, oh, I just want to give in. I just want to give in. You are future-proofing your child by doing this. You are, I hate the word brat. I think it's a heavy word, but you are limiting the amount of that you're going to see in the future if you can see through on the consequence. We're also not helping our younger generation by not giving them consequences, because real life does have consequences. And some of the most well-adjusted, healthiest young adults I've ever worked with are the ones who in their families did have the reality of consequences. If they did, and this is where to come back to very affluent families, there are those resources, there are tutors, there are safety nets. Things can happen to fix a problem. They really can. And I always say to parents, please, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And to just take that time to let your child have the privilege of making a mistake, because I really believe it is a privilege in, young adult life to make a mistake, to fall over, get yourself back up. That is your self-esteem you're building. If the parent does it for you, it's only theirs that they're building. So we have to back off. We have to make sure those consequences stick in place, because otherwise they're going to learn it really the hard way when it comes to a relationship or an employer or the law, So I always think, just remember, you're future-proofing your child.
You put it together so beautifully, and people often feel badly when they're giving a child of whatever age or a partner a natural consequence. And I believe that it is one of the greatest acts of love.
Absolutely.
Why? Yes, because love is action. And it's often easier, especially when we're tired or drained, just to give in. Standing our ground to help another person, to hold someone accountable so that they can learn from that situation, that sometimes takes 10 times the effort. And that is why, because it's so much easier to say, okay, here's $20, or okay, have your way, or here's 50 pounds, just go away, whatever it might be. It takes so much more work to say, wait, that was not appropriate. This is what the expectation is. This is what we need to do. Let's watch and make sure the follow through happens. That takes an abundant amount of effort. So I see all of these pieces as showing love, putting love in action.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And that has been my experience of working with, as you can imagine, a lot of the families I've worked with over the years have an army of yes people around them. Okay, from the family, and not all, and that industry is changing for the better, I must say. But I've so often seen there have been an army of yes, we don't like to deliver bad news. Whatever you say, that goes ahead, because, they're surrounded by very powerful, very wealthy people, and everyone wants to stick around. And you know what? They don't want to be the people that say no and deliver bad news. So when I come steamrolling in with, no, that's a hard line, we're not doing that, I might get initially some raised eyebrows, but on the whole, the family receive it as love.
And that shines through your humility and sincerity and genuineness and passion for advocating for every generation, but particularly the younger generation, where they have so much to offer. They have so much. And with some attention and TLC and mindfulness, we can help them make a world that gives them extreme internal wealth.
Absolutely.
Jessica, are there any, I could talk to you for hours. Are there any other pieces you would like to offer to our listeners?
Well, I think the one thing I always want to get across is that whether you yourself are an affluent parent or rising gen, young person, you know one, or if you don't, and they're the people that we see in the press and the ones with the, in quotes, Nepo baby titles that are, streamed around. It's really important that this group is approached with empathy. If you are a child who has been born into a very successful family, be that a business family, a multi-generational business family, a royal family, etc., we have to remember they didn't choose that. And in every other section of society, we have empathy for people who've been born into something that actually they found difficult. But when money is involved, that empathy suddenly vanishes. And I've worked with so many families over the years where, yes, of course, there are opportunities. Absolutely, there are privileges and resources that go with that. We should never ignore that. At the same time, it's unfair to put this burden of guilt on a young generation as they're just trying to work out who they are. And so just to approach that group with empathy. And the next time you hear somebody, pull out the poor little rich kid card, question it.
Jessica, thank you. In my heart, I could really feel that and feel how, the old saying, all that glitters is not gold.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have somebody's life, and we see it in the press now and again, where somebody had a glittery life and they commit suicide, or they are, hospitalized for a mental health issue, or all of these things. That absolutely empathy and realizing that the more somebody's in the press, the more notoriety or fame there is. It might look lovely and sparkle, but with that comes a lot of burden, especially for the younger generation who, as you say, for the kiddos who might not have been what they wanted, what they would have chosen if they could. And some people might be, oh, well, who wouldn't wave a magic wand and want privilege? Well, there are probably a lot of people out there, and we can see in cases where there's extreme wealth and somebody committed suicide. It's an example of somebody where privilege didn't quite do it for them. Very real level. So that we don't end on that very unhappy note, let's amplify again the importance of showing empathy. And if we want, be curious rather than assuming that somebody, always curiosity is a wonderful way to connect with people, to say to somebody, how are you doing? If you're talking to someone, what is your, what are the favorite parts of your life? And we might find that it's actually something very simple, like somebody saying, oh, nothing right now, but I'm looking back to the day when I lived in my studio apartment and ate noodle soup.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yes, always important not to assume. Well, Jessica, thank you again. I know it's late where you are, huge time difference. Thank you. And you're a mom and a
So much for
businesswoman.
having me.
Thank you. Where can our listeners find you?
You can find me at, I said www the other day, and one of my young mentees said, you don't need to say that anymore. Right. So it's just dallington.co is the website, or jessicamcgawley.com.
Listeners, don't need to have a pen if you're on the go. Those will all be in the show notes. Jessica's name is Jessica MC, capital GAWLEY. And you will have all the other the links in the show notes, including DNGTON Associates. And Jessica, again, thank you for sharing your time and incredible expertise with us today. I'm so appreciative. And to our listeners, thank you, as always, for sharing your time and energy with us today. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanly.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manly wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And, as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.